Montana Territory, December 1880. The wind howled over the low hills like a wounded animal, dragging snow across the dry earth and rattling the wooden slats of the barn. Colt Sanders pushed the heavy door open with his shoulder, lantern in hand, boots crunching on frozen hay. He had not planned to come out this far tonight, but something had spooked the horses, and he did not take chances with the cold like this. He stepped inside, the warm breath of the animals rising in clouds. That was when he saw her. Curled in the corner behind an empty feed trough, barely more than a bundle of rags and bones, was a woman. Dirt streaked her face, her hands curled protectively around her middle. Her eyes blinked once, slow and hollow, and then she tried to push herself up, only to collapse back into the straw. "Jesus," Colt muttered, rushing forward. Hey, do not move." She flinched as he reached her, so he knelt instead, setting the lantern down. Her lips were cracked, blood dried on her temple. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her bare feet purple with cold. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, voice low and steady. "You are safe now. I promise." Her eyes flicked open again, green, sharp beneath the grime, and held his for a moment. Then she whispered, "Please." "Food." Colt pulled off his coat without thinking, wrapping it around her shaking frame. "I got you. You just hold on." He carried her to the house, careful and fast, kicking the door shut behind him. He laid her on the settee in front of the fire and ran to the kitchen. Within minutes he had a bowl of hot broth in one hand and a clean cloth in the other. She was barely conscious when he returned, but when he lifted the spoon to her mouth, she sipped. It was only after she had taken a few mouthfuls that he asked, "What is your name?" She blinked slowly. "Rowena. I am Colt Sanders." She gave a slight nod, then her eyes slipped closed. He stayed by her side until dawn. Rowena slept for the better part of 2 days. Colt kept the fire going and fed her broth, water, and bits of bread when she could take it. When she finally sat up on her own, he was out back splitting wood. She watched through the window, saw the way he moved, quiet and strong, with a kind of tiredness in his shoulders that matched the ache in her chest. When he came in and saw her sitting up, he smiled. "Well, there she is." She managed a weak smile back. "How long was I out?" "2 nights. Thought I might lose you the first one." Rowena's fingers curled around the quilt he had wrapped her in. "I was walking for days. I thought I would make it to Red Lodge, but I got turned around in the hills. Everything after that is a blur." Colt set the wood by the hearth and dusted off his hands. "You have family there?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Just heard there might be work." He nodded slowly. "You do not have to explain anything. You are safe here." She looked at him, then really looked. He was maybe 30, with dark blonde hair that curled at the collar and rough hands that still moved gently. His eyes were blue, but not cold. He looked like a man who had lost things and learned to live with the quiet that came after. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. Colt sat down in the chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Had a wife. We lost a baby 2 winters ago. She left the spring after." Rowena's chest tightened. "I am sorry." He gave a slow nod, eyes on the fire. "I stopped hoping much after that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Me too." By the end of the week, Rowena was walking without help. She stayed out of Colt's way at first, watching from the porch as he worked the cattle, fixed fencing, and checked the traps down by the creek. But he always came back with something for her: dried fruit, a clean shawl, a new pair of socks he had bartered for in town. One afternoon, she surprised him by meeting him at the barn with a basket of bread and jerky. "I figured you could use something warm," she said, holding it out. He took it with a grateful smile. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to." They sat on the edge of the corral, eating in silence. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and Rowena tilted her face toward it, eyes closed. Colt glanced at her, then looked away. "Where were you before?" he asked softly. Rowena's hands stilled. "Colorado Springs. I worked at a boarding house. The man who ran it. He was not kind." Colt nodded, waiting. "He said I owed him. When I tried to leave, he hit me. Took what little I had. I walked for days. I thought I was going to die out there." She looked up as shining. "And then you found me." Colt swallowed hard. You were lying in the hay like a ghost. I thought my mind was playing tricks. She laughed just a little. I thought you were an angel. I am no angel, Rowena. She turned to him, her voice quiet. You saved my life. He met her gaze then, steady and sure. You saved mine too. You just do not know it yet. That night, she found him outside the barn, staring up at the stars. Cold out here, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. He shrugged. I like the quiet. She stepped closer. Me too. They stood there for a long moment, breath rising into the night. Then she looked up at him and said, Colt? Yeah? She reached for his hand. Thank you. For everything. His fingers wrapped gently around hers. You do not have to thank me. You belong here. She blinked, heart thudding. Do I? He looked at her then, his voice barely above a whisper. You do now. And for the first time in years, Rowena felt like she had come home. The snow turned to sleet by mid-morning, leaving the yard thick with slush and the roof dripping steady. Colt patched a broken hinge on the chicken coop while Rowena stood beneath the eave, feeding scraps to the hens from an old tin pail. She hadn't said much since the night she'd taken his hand, but she hadn't let go of it either, not really. Her presence followed him quietly, in the folded shirts by the hearth, the swept floor, the unexpected warmth in the house that hadn't been there before she came. You ever work with horses? Colt asked without looking up. Rowena wiped her hands on her skirt. Just watch them. The boarding house had a stable out back. I used to sit by the fence when I could. He hooked the door back in place and glanced over. Want to try brushing one out? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Colt led her into the barn where the air held the thick, living scent of hay and hide. He handed her a wooden-handled brush and opened the stall to a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. She's gentle. Name's Mercy. Rowena stepped forward slowly, eyes wide but steady. When she laid the brush against the mare's shoulder, the horse shifted but didn't spook. She's beautiful, Rowena whispered. She's yours to tend if you want, Colt said. Her hand paused. You're trusting me with her? I reckon she's got sense enough to let me know if you're doing it wrong. She smiled quietly and kept brushing. Colt watched her for a long moment, then went to the next stall. By nightfall, the sleet had stopped. Colt poured himself a cup of chicory and sat at the table while Rowena mended a tear in his shirt. The needle moved steady through the cloth, her brow furrowed in focus. You always sew like that? He asked. Like what? Like you're fixing something more than just fabric. Rowena didn't look up. Feels like if I can make one thing whole, maybe the rest'll follow. Colt sipped his drink slowly. That ever work? Not yet, she murmured. He reached across the table, touched her wrist. Might this time. She met his eyes. You really believe that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Later, when the fire had burned low and the lamp flickered soft across the walls, she sat beside him on the floor, back against the hearth. He was whittling a bit of pine into the shape of a bird, slow and patient. Her head tilted, watching the curl of shavings fall onto his trousers. Did you always live out here? She asked. No. I grew up outside of Bozeman. My father ran sheep mostly. I came farther west after the war. She nodded. You fight. He didn't answer right away. Just carved another line along the wing. I was 16 when I enlisted. Spent most of it clearing bodies off fields in Tennessee. Rowena looked at the flames. I was in Kansas back then. My mother died when I was 11. My aunt took me in for a while, then passed me to a family headed west. They left me in Colorado the year the railroad came through. She stopped, drawing her knees to her chest. I don't remember what peace feels like, she said. Colt set down his knife. Maybe it's not a feeling. Maybe it's just the moment you stop running. She turned her head toward him. I haven't run since I got here. He nodded. A silence settled, not heavy, but full, the kind where nothing more needed saying. The next morning, she was up before him, already outside with a bucket in hand, her braid tucked under a scarf. He watched her from the window, the way she moved slow but certain, like she was learning the rhythm of the land one step at a time. When she came in, cheeks pink and hands raw from the cold, she held out the bucket. Milk's warming on the stove. I'll start bread next. Colt took it, his voice low. You're making this place feel lived in again. Rowena looked down. I want to earn my keep. You already have. She didn't answer, but her hands lingered on the back of the chair before she turned away. The days stretched toward January. They found a rhythm, quiet and unspoken. She stitched curtains from old flour sacks. He built a shelf for her books with pine from the hill behind the barn. They worked side by side, and when they rested, it was in the same room, the same fire, the same quiet trust. One night, as the wind pushed against the windows and the stove clicked with heat, Rowena stood behind him while he cleaned his rifle. Her hand brushed his shoulder, tentative but sure. I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere, she said. He set the rifle down. I never thought anyone would want to stay with me. She stepped around to face him, her fingers curling over his. I do. He looked at her, long and careful. Then stay. And she did. By late January, the ground had hardened beneath a crust of old snow and the trees that lined the creek stood bare and still. Rowena came in from the smokehouse with her sleeves rolled and her hair pinned back, her apron dusted with ash and salt. Colt had spent the morning in the east pasture, driving off a coyote that had been circling too close to the calves. But now he stood at the wash basin, scrubbing dried blood from his knuckles. Rowena set the smoked meat on the pantry shelf, then turned toward him. You get it. He nodded. Didn't have to shoot. Just made enough noise to send it running. She leaned against the doorway. You always know what to do. Colt dried his hands on a rag and looked at her, really looked. The faint reddening at her wrists from the salt pack, the way her voice carried less hesitation now, her spine straighter than it had been a month ago. Not always, he said, but I know how to keep what matters safe. Rowena crossed the room, slow but sure, and took the rag from his hand to hang it by the stove. And what matters? He didn't answer right away, just reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek with the back of his fingers. You do. She caught his hand before he could pull it back. Then let me stay in it. Not just here. With you. Her voice didn't waver. Neither did his when he said, you already are. That evening, Colt brought down a battered cedar box from the loft. They sat beside the fire as he opened it, dust rising in a faint cloud. Inside were folded letters, a broken watch, a faded ribbon, and a small leather pouch bound in string. He handed her the pouch. I've been carrying this since the war ended. Found it on a field outside of Franklin. Thought maybe one day I'd give it to someone who needed it more than I did. Rowena opened it slowly. Inside was a glass rosary, its beads worn smooth. She looked up. You think I need saving? No, he said. I think you've already saved yourself. I just want you to know it. She held the rosary in both palms, the firelight glinting off the glass. I haven't prayed in years. You don't have to. Just hold it when you forget who you are. Later, she asked if she could sleep beside him. Not from fear, not from cold, just the want of closeness, something quiet and true. He made room without a word. The bed was wide enough, but they didn't part by even an inch. In the stillness, her voice reached him in the dark. I used to dream of a house with smoke rising from the chimney, a porch with a rocking chair, a man who didn't raise his voice. Colt turned toward her, his breath warm against her brow. You've got all that now. She curled closer. Then I won't run anymore. By February, the thaw began. The creek broke open in places, and birds returned to the edge of the field. Rowena planted dry beans in small wooden trays by the window, checking them each morning like they might sprout overnight. Colt built a new gate for the garden plot and showed her how to sharpen the hoe blades with a whetstone. One afternoon, she stood on the porch with her hands on her hips, looking out toward the line of cottonwoods. I want to build a clothesline between those trees, she said. Would you help me? Colt set down the pail he'd been carrying. We'll need good rope. I have some that's still strong. She smiled, then turned serious. I want to start putting things in the ground. Seeds, clothespins, roots. I want this place to know I'm not passing through. I'll dig the posts tomorrow. That night, she found him outside with a map spread across the porch table. He'd marked the boundary lines in charcoal and drawn small notes in the margin. This land's never had a name, he said, not looking up. Thought maybe you'd help me choose one. Rowena sat beside him, studying the rough lines. What about Stillwater? He nodded slowly. That suits it. She traced one of the creeks on the paper with her finger. And us? Colt turned to her, his voice quiet. We're not drifting anymore. She folded the map, careful with the creases, and set it aside. Then let's start building like we mean to stay. They did. The thaw loosened the ground enough for fence posts, and by early March Colt had driven 10 along the west side of the pasture while Rowena laid the wire, her hands steady despite the cold that still lingered in the soil. Her boots were soaked through by midday, but she didn't complain. She worked beside him like she meant to hold the land together with her own grip. That evening, Colt sat on the porch rail, oiling the hinges of the gate. Rowena brought out 2 mugs of warmed cider, her sleeves rolled above her elbows. She handed him one and leaned against the post beside him. I saw a wagon headed down the ridge trail this morning, she said. Had 2 women and a child in the back. They didn't look local. Colt sipped from the cup, his eyes on the far hills. Might be settlers trying to make it to Emigrant Gulch before the snow closes it again. Could be. But the child had a cough. I could hear it from the creek. Didn't sound good. He nodded, quiet for a long breath. Folks'll do desperate things when there's nowhere left to go. Rowena studied his profile. Did you ever think about leaving Montana? Once, right after the baby passed. I packed a mule and started south. Made it as far as the Madison before I turned around. Why'd you come back? He looked down into his cup. Didn't feel right to leave the land behind. Like I'd be burying her twice. She didn't move, just let the silence settle between them. Then her voice came even and low. If I'd found you that winter, would you have let me stay? He turned toward her. I would have been too far gone to see you. Rowena nodded. Then maybe it's a mercy we came together when we did. He reached out and touched her wrist, the gesture quiet but deliberate. No maybe about it. Later, she pulled a cedar crate from beneath the bed, filled now with dried herbs and folded linen. She knelt beside it, sorting through bundles of mullein and yarrow, her brow furrowed. Colt leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You planning to set up a still room? She glanced up. I want to be ready. Spring always brings sickness and the nearest doctor's 2 days out. He stepped inside and crouched beside her. You know what you're doing? My mother taught me what she could. I kept learning after. Folk remedies, mostly. I've seen them work when nothing else would. He picked up a bundle of dried elderflower. You think we'll have neighbors needing this? I think someone always does. He nodded once and stood. We'll make room in the pantry. You need glass jars. I'll ask Mr. Langdon next time I ride into town. Her eyes softened. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. By the next week, Rowena had carved labels for each jar and lined them along the kitchen shelf. She spent a day down by the riverbed collecting smooth stones to weigh down tincture cloths. Colt built a narrow table along the back wall for salves and poultices, using planks salvaged from an old henhouse. That Sunday, as the sun broke over the ridge, Colt saddled the gelding and tied a small parcel behind the saddlehorn. Heading into town, he said, tightening the cinch. Langdon said the mail packet finally came through. Might be a few things for you. Rowena stood by the fence, her hair braided down her back. You want me to ride with you? He studied her a moment. You feel ready? I think I'm done hiding. He offered his hand. She took it and he lifted her up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. They rode quiet, the trail muddy but passable, the sky wide above. In Stillwater, folks nodded but didn't stare, and Rowena kept her chin level. They stopped at the mercantile, then at the post office. Colt came out with a wrapped bundle and a small envelope. He handed it to her. Your name's on it. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a single scrap of paper with a bank seal and the signature of the boarding house owner, a release of debt postmarked the week after she left. She stared at it, then handed it back. "I didn't ask for this." Langdon said. A circuit judge passed through and shut the place down. Word got out about what he did to the girls there. Rowena looked away, her throat working. "I didn't think there was justice left in the world." Colt folded the paper and tucked it into her coat pocket. "Sometimes it finds the right person after all." On the ride home, she leaned into him, her head against his back. At the cabin, he helped her down, but she didn't let go of his hand. Inside, the fire had burned low. She turned to him in the doorway. "I want to take your name." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You sure? I don't need a preacher. I don't need papers. I just want to belong to something that won't break." He stepped forward, his voice low. "Then let's make it so." Rowena nodded. "I'll mark it in the family Bible. And you carve it on the gate." He brushed his fingers along her cheek. "Rowena Sanders," he said softly. "That sounds right." "It is." That night, they climbed into the same bed, not just for warmth or comfort, but because there was no more room between them for anything but truth. The wind moved against the shutters, steady and sure, but inside everything finally held. The first calf of the season came just after dawn, slick and shivering beneath the wide flank of a dun-colored cow. Colt knelt beside it in the straw, coaxing it toward its mother with both hands. Rowena stood nearby, her skirts tucked up and her boots deep in the muck, holding a pail of warm water and a length of linen in case it was needed. "She's taking to it," Colt said, watching the calf wobble up on spindly legs. Rowena set the pail down and crouched beside him. "It's early for a birth. She must have come into season ahead of the others." The calf nudged toward the udder, instinct strong despite its weakness. Rowena held her breath as it latched, then exhaled slowly. "That's a good sign." Colt looked sideways, his voice low. "You're calm for a first-time midwife." "I wasn't, not really," she said. "But I kept thinking how you told me once that most things find their way, if you let them." He gave a slow nod. "That sounds like something I'd say." She stood, brushing straw from her apron. "I think I believe it now." That evening, she found him in the lean-to, sorting through iron nails and strips of oak. He was building something, though he hadn't said what. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're hiding something." He glanced up, eyes catching hers. "Not hiding, just working quiet." She stepped forward, eyebrow raised. "Colt Sanders, if that's a cradle I see." He set the hammer down and met her gaze. "It is." Rowena blinked. "You knew." He nodded. "I saw you touch your stomach last week. And the way you've been tired by noon, though you don't say it." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "I wasn't sure how to tell you." "You just did." She reached for his hand, placing it gently over the front of her dress. "I wasn't planning for this. Neither was I. But I'm glad." He laced his fingers through hers. "Me too." They finished the cradle together over the next few days. She sanded the rails while he shaped the runners. When it was done, he carried it into the bedroom and set it beside the hearth, where the fire would keep it warm through the lingering cold. By the end of March, Rowena planted the first rows of carrots and onions in the thawed patch of earth behind the house. Colt built a low fence around it to keep the deer out. They worked side by side beneath the steady sky, their sleeves rolled and cheeks flushed, not from effort, but from the quiet joy of doing things that would last. One afternoon, a rider came up from the South Trail. It was a woman in a long coat, face lined by wind and age. She dismounted slowly, favoring her left leg. "Name's Hester Lang," she said. "I've been nursing up near the basin, but folks tell me you've got a still room here now." Rowena stepped forward. "I've got herbs and salves. I can offer what I know." The woman nodded. "Good. There's a family near the stone bluff. Their youngest has a fever that won't break." Colt fetched the mule and packed a bundle of supplies. Rowena rode with Hester, returning after dark with her skirts damp and her hands stained with willow bark and soot. She didn't speak much, only leaned against Colt when he wrapped her in his coat by the fire. "She's resting easy now," Rowena said at last. "I think she'll live." Colt pressed a kiss to her temple. "You did that." She closed her eyes and let herself rest in the warmth of his shoulder. Through April, the world softened. Snowmelt carved narrow streams through the pasture. The hens began to lay again. Rowena's belly grew round beneath her skirts. She didn't move as fast, but Colt adjusted without needing to be asked. He lifted the heavier pails, reached the top shelf, brought her wild mint when the morning sickness returned. One evening they sat by the fire, the cradle between them. Rowena stitched a small quilt from scraps of old cotton. Colt whittled a rattle from a piece of applewood. She spoke without looking up. "Do you ever think of her? The child you lost?" He set the rattle down. "I do. Not with pain anymore. Just wondering who she might have been." Rowena nodded. "I think of my mother that way." He reached across the cradle and took her hand. "This child will carry all of them with them. That's how we keep them close." She smiled softly. "Then they'll never be far." The birth came in the first week of June, just after a night of thunderstorms that left the air washed clean and the ground rich with scent. Colt stayed by her side, wiping her brow, holding her hand through every cry and breath and silence. When the child arrived red-faced and wailing, Rowena wept with joy. Colt wrapped the baby in a soft wool blanket and held them close, his arms steady even as his heart trembled. "It's a boy," he whispered. Rowena reached for him, her voice hoarse. "Let me see." He laid their son in her arms and kissed her forehead. "You did it." "We did," she said. They named him Elias, after her grandfather, and Colt carved the name into the gate beneath theirs. That summer, the garden bloomed high with sweet peas and corn. The chickens fattened on bugs and grain. Neighbors came by with bread and preserves, and Rowena brewed tea for everyone who sat on the porch swing Colt had built from old wagon boards. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air warmed the back of their necks, Rowena stood barefoot in the grass, rocking Elias against her shoulder. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "You happy?" he asked. She leaned into him. "More than I ever thought I'd be." He kissed the curve of her neck. "Then we did something right." She turned and kissed him, long and sure, the baby asleep between them. The house held light in every window that night, and the smoke from the chimney curled into a sky full of stars. Inside were shelves lined with jars, a cradle worn smooth by loving hands, and two people who had come through fire and silence and found each other waiting on the other side. They never left that land. They built more rooms, planted more rows, raised their son with quiet strength and open hearts. And every morning, Rowena stood on the porch as Colt came in from the fields, and he kissed her like it was the first time. And every evening, they sat together in the hush of dusk, the world around them full and green, and nothing ever felt unfinished again.